Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hidden Treasures. My name is Bill Safer, your host, and we are coming to you from the studios of WCCA TV in downtown Worcester. In Worcester, it's channel 194, and all over the world, it's on the internet at WCCATV.com, and you can even watch archived shows that we've had from the past. So there's a lot of shows there. Before I get into today's topic of discussion, I'd like to do a hello, or as I call them, shout-outs. This is a little longer than I normally would, but the impact that the show has when it was made international is I get emails from people from all over the place. And these happen to be from California and Colorado. I'd like to say hello to Sarah Vincelli, who is the owner of Tapestries of the Mind on Facebook. Sarah makes beautiful art prints which have sold in shows and on the internet. Her website is Tapestries of the Mind on Facebook, as I mentioned, so you can just do a search for that. So contact her there and view some of the beautiful art she's producing. I purchased a print and I brought it to show you. And that's just one. She has many, many different styles, but the colors and the designs are really beautiful. And the design is kind of mesmerizing when you look at it long enough. And she was inspired in her art by her mother, Carol Vincelli, and her late grandmother, Louise Olds. And may Louise's memory be a blessing. And Sarah's grandfather, Albert Olds, was a master sergeant in the Army in World War II and received the Purple Hearts. Another of Sarah's shops is in partnership with her partner, Travis Anderson. Together they travel the countryside prospecting for rocks, minerals, and gems. Travis makes the cabochon, which are usually pieces of agate that you shape and polish, and when completed, they're ready to be made into jewelry. To see some of Sarah and Travis's gems, go to Random Raven Antiques Treasures Collection, also on Facebook. Thanks for watching, Sarah, and everybody out in California and Colorado. And one other one, I'd like to say hello to Lynn Norton Anderson of Reiku Pottery, who makes beautiful pieces with a lovely Reiku metallic pottery. It's pottery that has a metallic glaze of gold or silver. They're really beautiful. She has a shop on Etsy. Just do a search on her name or Reiku Pottery. Okay, today I want to talk about a few different things, but mostly about one of my passions, collecting miniature books. Now, real miniature books must be 3 inches tall and under, and they must be bound and printed just like a regular book and be readable. Many of these miniature books are bound better than their bigger cousins and can cost more as well. I have brought some to show you. Now, I wrote a book that was published in miniature entitled Shelling, and Frank's going to show a picture of that. There are 2 pictures. I wrote this back in 1982, and it was about my seashell collecting adventures in the South China Sea off the coast of Okinawa. See, that's a penny compared to the size of it. It was printed in 1982, all about my scuba diving adventures in the Sea of South China Sea off the coast of Okinawa. Believe it or not, that's hand-bound. It has end papers, perfectly readable, and was even illustrated. So, and that book is sold out. And even in '82, it went for $25, which I didn't know until after I wrote it. I got paid for writing it, but I didn't think they would sell, but they sold out, and now I've seen them for as much as $100. So that was nice. And my publisher was Miriam Irwin of Mosaic Press in Ohio. When she asked me if I could do illustrations for the book, I said, if you want them to look like a kindergartner student made them, I do it. But other than that, she should hire an illustrator, which she did. You could see the book measures about an inch, a little over an inch high. And there's another page I think Frank can show that shows you how it's printed. That's in that tiny book. That's the wording. So, and on the left is autographed by me. We had to autograph them, and these illustrator autographed them by the publisher, so they could. She thought they would sell better. But that is just one of many miniature books that I started to collect about 30 years ago. They occasionally have one of my books spotted in Europe. I received a call one time by a gentleman who is named Robert Bradbury. He's one of the world's most famous and expert miniature books, and he was in Switzerland and England, and he said he saw a book for sale in both those countries. I only have one copy, and I'd like to get another one, but I'm not going to pay $100 for my own book. So, but I did find a copy at a yard sale one summer in an old cigar box at a yard sale that was 1.5 miles from my house. Now, what are the chances of that? That's why I always say a hidden treasure can come up everywhere. I gave lectures and seminars about miniature book over the years, up until recent times. A lot of people don't know about them. And when you get a book, miniature books have been made since the pharaohs of Egypt, and even before. Archaeologists have found little postage stamp-sized miniature clay tablets with Sumerian writing, the writing which no longer exists. When's the last time you went to the library and said, "I'd like a Sumerian book of language, please"? And there isn't such a thing anymore. This little tablet is displayed in a museum that predates the pharaohs in Egypt. It's a tiny little inch-by-inch tablet that has it looks like Morse code, but it is Sumerian writing, and it is considered a miniature book. Now, in the Middle Ages, many miniature books were made and hand-illuminated, what they called the very fancy writing done by monks. And oftentimes it was done with gold leaf and very colorful illustrations. And the whole book was done by hand. And a fan of these miniature books, believe it or not, was the notorious King Henry VIII. He gave a gold mountain miniature book to one of his wives, Anne Boleyn, one of Henry VIII's numerous wives, most of whom were executed by beheading. And Anne Boleyn was one miniature book collector who lost her head, literally, while having miniature books. Now, over the years, people loved that these miniature books could be easily carried from place to place and were easily concealed because, as an example, when the British ruled the U.S. colonies, the rule was made that if any citizen was caught with any anti-British literature, they were to be immediately executed. They were such nice people when the British ruled us. So to combat that, the printers discreetly and secretly printed pro-Revolutionary War material in tiny books and pamphlets that they could keep in their pockets. When the Declaration of Independence was actually published, there was, I think, 200 copies made. And there's still a lot of them that haven't been found. They're original handwritten copies because all the copy machines back then were broken, so they had to do it by hand. And the people would fold it up and put them behind paintings or put them behind pictures. And to this day, someone will buy a $5 painting at a yard sale in New Hampshire, and they find a Declaration of Independence copy in the back. It's worth about $2 million, no matter what way you look at it, no matter what its condition. But the colonial revolutionary forces, led by General George Washington, often carried the miniature books and manuscripts full of the anti-British rule material because they were not afraid of the British. At that time, they had a huge army. And of course, as we know, they ended up winning. And then there are miniature books that have covers and pages, but no printing. These are not real miniature books. Even though they're under 3 inches in height and they may be hard or soft cover, we call them dollhouse miniature books because they are made for a children's dollhouse. They have libraries. You know, a lot of the dollhouses have rooms just like a regular house. So you lift up the roof and there's a library and a kitchen. And in the library, they would have oftentimes the blank books, but sometimes they would have real miniature books. So that's why if you see them at a yard sale or a flea market, you have to examine them closely, because if you open them up and you see writing, just close the book and buy it if it's a reasonable price, because I don't know of about any miniature book that is not worth at least $25. And if you could get it for $1 or $2 or $3, then you're doing all right. I'm going to show you some of these miniature books so you can see for yourself what they look like and the many sizes they were produced. I don't have the smallest. At one time, I owned it, but I sold it. But there are books the size of 3 periods, and you have to turn the pages with a pin, and they're fully readable. Now, here is one, and I have a penny next to it to show you that how small the actual book is. And the title of this book is The 2,000-Mile Dash by Black Cat Press. I don't know what it's about. I haven't read all these because if you handle them too much, you can destroy them. But they are readable. And so there's that one. And we have some even smaller. That this one here, you can see how tiny it is. It is, here's the penny, and here's the book. It's the size of a penny, basically. And it is fully readable. And this one, it's going to be hard to see, but the writing is about the size of the head of a pin. Yet, it's perfectly readable and hard to hold on to. Now, these larger books were made by a gentleman called Achille St. Onge, and he's considered the grandfather of miniature books. And he lived on off of Burncoat Street in Worcester, Mass. And he made miniature books. This is one of his books. He made many. But his books were a little larger, about at a little below the maximum size that you would want a miniature book. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. This is his book, and it has gold leaf on it, and the title on the spine, just like a regular book. And you can see, perfectly readable. And here was the other one that I was showing from before. This is leather bound, smaller. Here's the penny. It's smaller, but it's still, see, there's the penny, and there's the book. That's how small they can be. Now, this one here, look how tiny that is. And that book is written all in Hebrew. It's I got this years ago, and you can't read this unless you know Hebrew, and I can read it, but I don't know what I'm reading. So, but it's in another language, so the miniature books are all over the world. Now, these two tiny things are almost at the maximum tininess of books. These books were owned by another collector, and they have a miniature book plate in them. I haven't been able to figure out who it was, but I do have one who has a book plate of Stanley Marcus, who owned Neiman Marcus department stores. He was a big miniature book collector. And he bought one of my books and put his book plate in it, and I tried to buy it back, but someone beat me to it. But I enjoy having these, and these are only not even an inch high. Now, if you see this book, you see the little gold square on the cover. I have a book that would fit in that gold square, and it's bound in leather, and it has God's prayer in it, and you have to turn the pages with a pin, like I said before on some of the miniature books. And it's so tiny, if you sneeze, you can blow it away. So these two books are St. Ange's. He always made this size. And he used to sell from his home, like I said, and I buy some from his wife. And these are the two of them that I bought. He printed his first one in the 30s, and there was only 100 copies, and it was sold at den homes. And they were sold for $35 each. They were sold out. I happened to find one at a store, and I knew the owners, and they sold it to me. They wanted to sell it to me for $25. I said, no, I won't buy it for $25. Let me sell it for you, and I'll get you a lot more. I just couldn't do it. So I took it to Boston and got $900 for it. So when I came back, I handed the owner of the store $900 bills, and he almost fainted. But he peeled off two and gave them to me, which was very nice. And if I know somebody or I'm a good friend of theirs, I can't do that. But if it's a yard sale or a flea market I don't know, then it's all hands on deck. Whatever treasure you find is yours. Okay, now here's an example of one that is bound in like a satin cloth. And this one is quite old, and it's in Spanish. I wish I had Lucy here to translate, but it does have Spanish writing. It's a fully bound book, and this is probably about 50 to 80 years old. I have some that are over 100 years old. And that's just an example of some of the miniature books that I have. I have a bunch more, but there are people that make my collection look tiny. And my book, believe it or not, any miniature book that is published is cataloged and numbered like a regular book. They're given a Library of Congress number and an ISBN number. An ISBN number identifies your book, so you can just write that ISBN number on the internet and it'll take you to the book. So I was very happy about that. Now, the smallest miniature book in the world, as I said, I had a copy, was titled Old King Cole. It's an old, like a fable that I remember hearing as a kid. Now probably that's, they don't say that anymore. It was so tiny that the pages could hardly be turned with a pin. And I believe that this tiny size may have been surpassed, but it may not. So if it's not, I heard that it wasn't. So that makes that book worth twice as much or 3 times as much as I sold it for. And when I tell you I got a great price for it, but having twice more, but you never look back, you look ahead. I've gotten some nice books. And like I said, Mr. St. Ange, who lived off of Burncoat Street, he passed away and he left his collection to Clark University. And I had the honor of going to Clark University when they did a special tribute to Mr. St. Ange with his wife and his family. And his wife donated probably 100 or more books to their permanent collection. Now, I have a copy of my book is at the Worcester Public Library. I gave a talk about it in 1982, and they asked if they could have a copy. So I gave them one, and it's on file there. It's not on display. You have to ask for it, but if you ask for it, they'll bring it out for you to look at. Now, I mentioned Robert C. Bradbury of Worcester. And his catalog of miniature books and his knowledge is the best, considered the best in the world. He wrote a book of all the miniature books that were printed in the 20th century, and he wrote another book of all the miniature books that were printed in the 19th century. And you should see this, how many. I was flabbergasted. Either that or it was Taco Bell. I was gassed. But I was really shocked when I found out how many were made. So sure enough, on the ones that were made in the 20th century, my book was listed there. and I didn't know that either, so that was nice. And some miniature books can bring many thousands of dollars. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Believe it or not, like I always like to say, believe it or not, because some people don't believe it. But some of the books are always not printed with leather or cloth bindings. I've seen them with ivory book covers. I've seen sterling silver book colors. I've seen exotic skins, like snakeskin, ostrich, an elephant when they were legal to hunt, and I'm glad they're not legal to hunt anymore. And there's even a few that were bound with human skin. Now, this wasn't done through a murder or a torture. The person who collected the miniature books was wealthy enough that when he died in the old days, you could allow your skin to be removed. It's really grotesque, but you could have a big bound book in your skin or a miniature book. And if you go to the Boston Library, they have some of them that are bound in human skin. And it was a millionaire that, those days, a millionaire was like being a billionaire now, and he wanted his skin on it. Why? I don't know, but that's what he wanted. Now, in the days gone by, in the old days, as they say, miniature books in the form of diaries and pocket calendars were very common and popular. I have some of them, and they're only an inch and a half high, 2 inches high, and oftentimes they'll just say the date, 1878, and then when you go into them, they weren't all blank line pages. They would have the postage rates for the area that they're in. If it was from England, they'd have the postage rates in England. If it was American, they'd have the postage rate, of course, in cents. But it was interesting because you're talking like 1800s, early 1900s. They'd have who the presidents were, and stamps were a penny. And also they had the postmaster general, who was the president. And they had all this information that the current books don't have. So it's very interesting, and that's what makes them kind of valuable, especially if you get one from the Civil War era. And they were made since the 16 or 1700s. But I have seen one at an antique shop that was from the Civil War. It was around 1865, 1866. And the person who was writing the diary was a Civil War soldier who had bought, you could buy these diaries at the general store. Every town had a general store. Some had a larger store. And in that book, he was a Union soldier from Massachusetts, because it was a Massachusetts antique shop. And I started reading, and he's talking about his commanding general and where they're going and what battle they were facing and some of the battles they already were in. And in the beginning of the book, which was great, instead of just saying like John Hawkins, he had Corporal John Hawkins, first of the 25th Massachusetts Volunteers of the Union Army. So right away, that book goes 4 times or 5 times its value. And then you add on the information in the diary about the Civil War and naming people, and that just skyrockets it. It's all about the provenance, where it came from, what it documents, what it says. It's like during World War II, Hitler, as you know, was no fan of the Jewish people or anybody else that was against him. So when the Americans invaded Berlin and the Nazis took off, a Jewish guy, he was a private, he went into Hitler's office and he took his personal stationery. It says Adolf Hitler on the top with the wings and the swastika. And he wrote, "Hi, Ma, this is your son, Joe Stein. I'm in Adolf Hitler's office. What do you think of that?" And they printed it in Life magazine. But number one, because it's on his stationery, just a blank piece would be about $4,000. But because you have a World War II Jewish soldier that wrote that, probably $5,000, $6,000 now. I think it's in the Smithsonian, but I thought that was kind of neat that he did that. Now, miniature books to this day are still being published and are still being sold. What you want to do if you have an interest in miniature books, now that we're on the internet, it's a veritable gold mine. I mean, you type in Google or Bing or any of the search engines, just type in miniature books, and you're going to get not only pictures and stories about miniature books, you're going to get dealers of miniature books. And when you click on the dealers, you will be able to click on books they have for sale, and you'll be able to buy them directly from the dealer. There's a dealer in California. I don't know how, in heaven's name, she was able to acquire the thousands and thousands of books she has for sale, but sometimes people are fortunate to be at an estate sale where they buy a box load of miniature books. Now, a box, let's say that bananas come in, can hold 3,000 miniature books, and with each one going up until the thousands down to $25, you have some money there. So she has a lot of books that are no longer in print, that are rare, and that are collector's editions. I have a couple of books that are odd that were printed by a miniature book printer in Connecticut. And he did some odd things. He printed books on matchbooks. He put them in cylinders, and you had to unroll a scroll. He put them in magnified boxes. His name was Robert E. Mossman, and he's passed away. But his books, a lot of his books are in the Library of Congress, and any miniature book collection worth its salt will have at least one Mossman miniature in it. They're still out there. They're still circulating around, but they're going to be a little higher than you would have paid some years ago. So let me leave you with this. I'd like to tell you that when you go out to the church sales, and the yard sales, and the flea markets that are coming up or that are being held, be on the lookout for these tiny treasures, because one of them could be a hidden treasure that'll add some money to your life. Go out and find a treasure. Go out and find a miniature book. Thanks for watching.